The wind bit at her face, a whip of dust and grit that seemed to carry the town's judgment on its mournful howl. She stood on the makeshift scaffold, a crate overturned beneath a gnarled oak on the edge of the sparse settlement. Her hands were bound with rough rope, scratching her wrists raw. The noose, a stiff coil of braided hemp, hung beside her head, thick and dark against the bruised sky. Below, faces blurred into a single, hostile mass, eyes narrow, mouths set in grim lines of self-righteous fury. They saw not a woman, but an other, a symbol of unwelcome change, a convenient target for their fear and frustration. The charge was flimsy, a trumped-up accusation lost in the din of their anger, but the verdict had been swift and final, delivered not by law, but by mob rule. Fear was a cold stone in her gut, heavy and sharp. It stole her breath, made her limbs tremble despite her effort to stand still, to offer them no sign of weakness. Let them have her life, but not her dignity. She was Mei Lin. In her mind, she repeated the name, an anchor against the rising tide of panic. Mei Lin, daughter of Chun, who taught her the strength of bamboo bending in the wind. Sister to Jian, whose laughter echoed only in memory now. She had crossed an ocean, endured unimaginable hardship, seeking a place where breath came free, only to find herself here, bound and condemned for the shape of her eyes, the texture of her hair, the language she carried in her soul. A man stepped forward from the crowd, not one of the rabble, but the self-appointed leader, his face hard as the rocky soil. He held a coil of rope, a crude instrument of finality. The murmurs below quieted, anticipation thick in the air. Mei Lin closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. She thought of the tea ceremony her mother taught her, the quiet grace, the scent of jasmine. She held on to that memory, a fragile shield against the ugliness surrounding her. Then, a different voice cut through the tension, deep, resonant, carrying the weight of the land itself. Hold! The man with the rope paused, turning. The crowd shifted, a ripple of annoyance and confusion spreading through them. Standing slightly apart from the main group was a man on horseback. He hadn't joined the clamor, had merely watched from the periphery, a silent observer. He was a rancher, known by the name of Cormac. A man of few words, his face weathered and lined like old leather, his eyes the color of storm clouds. He wasn't part of their town, didn't share their petty grievances, yet his presence commanded a grudging respect, born of his quiet competence and the vast, unyielding land he worked. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, his movements economical. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make grand pronouncements. He simply walked towards the scaffold, his spurs clinking softly in the silence. "This ain't right," he said, his voice low but carrying. "This ain't law. This is murder." A man in the crowd shouted, "She's a threat, a foreigner. They take our jobs." Cormac stopped a few feet away, his gaze sweeping over the faces, challenging each one silently. "Threat? She's a woman, bound and helpless. Jobs? The land is vast, holds enough for any man willing to work it." He turned his gaze to the leader by the scaffold. "You want justice? This ain't it. This is cowardice." The leader bristled, but something in Cormac's steady gaze held him. Cormac wasn't armed in a flashy way, but he moved with an easy strength that suggested capability. He hadn't come to fight, but to stand. "She was found near the Widow Perkins' place after the fire," the leader growled, trying to regain control. "She's Chinaman's bad luck." Cormac's jaw tightened. Superstition won't hold up against what the law will say when word of this gets out. "You think this little town is outside of it?" He paused, letting the implication settle. The nearest sheriff was days away, but the rancher's words planted a seed of doubt. They were acting in their own world, but that world had edges. "Let her go," Cormac stated, not asking but directing. "She comes with me, off my land. You won't see her again." The crowd muttered, uncertain. They wanted the spectacle, the release of their pent-up fear and hatred. But they also understood the quiet power of the rancher, the potential consequences of defying a man who represented a different kind of authority, the authority of self-reliance and independence that they grudgingly admired, even if they resented his separation from their groupthink. The leader hesitated, glancing at the faces around him, seeing indecision. He looked at Mei Lin, then at Cormac. Defiance meant confronting the rancher, possibly alienating a man whose land bordered theirs, whose influence, though unspoken, was felt. Agreement meant backing down, losing face, but avoiding a direct conflict. The rancher's gaze remained steady, unwavering. He offered them an out, a way to disperse without losing everything. He wasn't defending her innocence in their eyes, merely asserting that this wasn't the way, and taking responsibility for her removal. Mei Lin watched, breath held tight in her chest. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the shift in the air, the tension that wasn't just about her anymore, but about the men below and the man standing against them. She saw something flicker in Cormac's eyes, not pity, but a stark, unyielding refusal to let this particular cruelty stand. It was a fragile thread of hope in a world that had offered none. The leader, after a long, pregnant silence, finally made his choice. He lowered the rope, his face a mask of resentment. "Get her down. She's yours, rancher. On your head be it." Cormac gave a short, sharp nod. He didn't thank them. He didn't gloat. He simply walked forward and, with a single, clean motion of a knife drawn from his belt, cut the rope binding Mei Lin's hands. Her wrists were raw, chafed. She stumbled slightly, her legs weak from fear and standing. He didn't reach for her, didn't offer a hand. He just looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked towards his horse. "Come on," he said, his voice gruff. It wasn't an invitation. It was an instruction. She hesitated for only a second, glancing back at the still resentful crowd, then at the man who had saved her from the noose. She didn't know him. She didn't know why he had done this, but the alternative was death. She scrambled down from the crate, her legs unsteady, and followed him. He mounted his horse, waiting. She reached the horse's side, unsure what to do. He extended a large, calloused hand, palm up. Not a gesture of tenderness, but practicality. A lift. She placed her small, trembling hand in his, and he hoisted her up behind him with surprising ease. He turned the horse, steering it away from the settlement, towards the open, empty land that stretched out to the horizon. The wind, still cold and sharp, now felt less like an instrument of judgment and more like the vast, indifferent breath of the world. The silence behind him was absolute. He didn't ask her name. He didn't explain himself. He simply rode, his back straight, his focus ahead. She clung to his waist, her face pressed against his back, feeling the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her, the solid presence of the man who had plucked her from the brink. The town and its hatred receded behind them, shrinking into insignificance against the immense landscape. Survival felt fragile, uncertain, but it was, finally, possible. The raw fear slowly began to recede, replaced by a profound exhaustion and a new, cautious awareness of the unknown path ahead, riding with a stranger into the wilderness. They rode for what felt like hours, leaving the hateful cluster of buildings far behind. The land was harsh, unforgiving stretches of dry grass, thorny scrub, rock formations that clawed at the sky. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic thud of the horse's hooves and the constant whisper of the wind. Mei Lin clung to Cormac's waist, the physical discomfort of the ride a dull ache compared to the recent terror. She watched his broad back, the set of his shoulders, trying to decipher the man who had saved her. He didn't look back, didn't offer a word. He was a silhouette of quiet strength against the vast canvas of the sky. As dusk began to paint the horizon in bruised purples and oranges, he finally pulled the horse to a stop near a shallow gully, offering some meager shelter. He dismounted first, then reached up, his hand a solid anchor as she slid down, her legs stiff and shaky. She stood awkwardly, unsure what was expected. He didn't look at her directly. He simply began to unsaddle the horse, his movements practiced and efficient. "Water," he said, his voice low. He gestured with his chin towards a small, tin cup by his saddlebag. She understood the word. She took the cup, her hands still trembling slightly, and found his canteen. The water was lukewarm, but clean. She drank slowly, feeling life returning to her parched throat. He watched her peripherally as he worked, his gaze lingering for a moment on her unbound wrists, the red marks vivid against her skin. He built a small fire as darkness deepened, the flames a welcome warmth in the cooling air. He had sparse provisions, jerky, hardtack, coffee. He offered her a piece of jerky on the tip of his knife. She took it carefully, not meeting his eyes. The meat was tough, salty, but sustenance. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the night wind. After eating, he rolled out 2 bedrolls some distance apart. He didn't say anything, just indicated with a tilt of his head. The unspoken instruction was clear: rest, but keep your distance. Mei Lin unrolled hers, the rough wool scratchy against her skin. She lay down, pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders. She was exhausted, but sleep was a distant prospect. She watched the flames dance, her mind replaying the events of the day. The faces in the crowd, the feel of the rope, the sudden, unexpected intervention of the quiet man by the horse. She glanced over at him. He sat by the dying fire, staring into the embers, his features unreadable in the flickering light. He wasn't armed in a visible way, but she sensed a readiness in him, a quiet vigilance. Why had he done it? Pity? A sense of justice? Or something else entirely? His face was a landscape as rugged and closed off as the land around them. She knew nothing about him, yet her life, her very survival, depended on him. It was a terrifying thought. She shifted, pulling her knees to her chest. The cold seeped into her bones. He seemed to sense her discomfort, though she hadn't made a sound. Without a word, he rose and went to his saddlebags, returning with another blanket, heavier than the one she had. He didn't hand it to her, but laid it carefully on top of her existing bedroll, tucking it around her shoulders. His touch was brief, impersonal, yet the gesture itself was one of quiet care. "Thank you," she whispered, the words rusty and quiet in the vast silence. He paused, his shadow falling over her. "Sleep," he said, his voice flat. He returned to his spot by the fire, leaving her wrapped in the extra warmth. It wasn't much, a simple blanket, but it felt like a shield against the night, against the cold, against the fear that still clawed at the edges of her mind. It was the first act of simple, unearned kindness she had received in this land. It didn't erase the hatred she had faced, but it offered a tiny corner of safety. She lay there, watching him, the silence between them not empty, but filled with the unspoken weight of their shared experience, bound by necessity and the sudden, decisive act that had altered both their paths. Trust wasn't given easily, not in this world, but perhaps, slowly, tentatively, it could be built, one quiet act, one shared silence at a time. Sleep finally claimed her, the image of his stoic face and the warmth of the blanket a fragile comfort against the vast indifference of the night. The next few days were a blur of riding, sparse meals, and silence. They traveled through canyons, across dry plains, under an endless sky. Cormac set a steady pace, his knowledge of the land absolute. He seemed to navigate by instinct, following faint trails, finding hidden water sources only hinted at by changes in vegetation. Mei Lin learned to ride behind him, her body adapting to the rhythm of the horse, her grip on his waist secure. She watched him constantly, observing his quiet competence, the way he read the wind, the clouds, the signs of wildlife. He remained a man of few words. He would point towards water, hand her food, indicate when it was time to rest. He asked nothing of her, demanded nothing. He simply endured, his presence a steady, solid anchor in their uncertain journey. Mei Lin, in turn, offered silent cooperation. She learned to be as quiet as possible, to anticipate his needs where she could, pouring coffee, tending the small fire. She didn't try to talk, sensing that words were not his language. Survival was their shared tongue, spoken in actions and necessity. The initial fear she felt around him began to dissipate, replaced by a watchful respect. He wasn't kind in an effusive way, but his actions showed a deep, practical consideration. He chose sheltered spots to camp, shared their meager food equally, and was always vigilant, his eyes scanning the horizon. He never looked at her with judgment or pity, only with a quiet, assessing gaze, as if she were another element of the landscape he needed to understand to navigate. One afternoon, they were making their way through a narrow canyon when Cormac suddenly pulled the horse to a halt, holding up a hand. He dismounted silently, melting into the shadows of the rocks. Maylin strained her ears, hearing nothing but the wind. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the familiar grip of fear returning. Had they been followed? After a tense moment, Cormac reappeared, carrying a coiled rope. He pointed upwards, towards a narrow ledge high above them. He indicated that she should climb using handholds he pointed out. It was a difficult ascent, her muscles protesting. He climbed behind her, providing a steadying presence, his hand briefly on her back when she faltered. Once on the ledge, they had a view of the canyon below. He spoke, his voice low. "Riders, 2 of them, heading this way." Maylin's blood ran cold. "From the town? Come to reclaim their justice?" She looked at Cormac, fear raw in her eyes. He met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw something other than stoicism, a hard, protective edge. "They won't find us here," he said, his voice firm. He showed her a small alcove in the rock face, hidden from view below. "Stay put. Don't make a sound." He didn't climb into the alcove with her. He positioned himself on the ledge, just out of sight, his rifle at the ready. He was shielding her, literally placing himself between her and the potential threat. Maylin huddled in the alcove, listening to the distant sound of hooves approaching. She could feel the tremor of them through the rock. The riders passed below, their voices indistinct shouts echoing up the canyon. They were searching, she knew it, calling out, perhaps her name, perhaps curses. The sound faded, slowly, agonizingly. Cormac remained still long after the sounds died away, listening, his senses sharp. Only when he was certain they were gone did he lower his rifle. He didn't relax visibly, but the tension eased from his posture. He looked at her, still huddled in the alcove, her face pale. "They're gone," he said simply. She nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight. He helped her descend from the ledge, his hands firm and steady. As they rode away from the canyon, the silence between them felt different. It wasn't just the absence of words, but a shared understanding that had deepened in the face of danger. He had not abandoned her. He had faced the threat head-on for her. It was a profound realization. Later that evening, by the fire, she felt a shift within herself. The terror hadn't vanished, but it no longer held absolute dominion. She had seen his quiet courage, had trusted him with her life, and he had delivered. She was still vulnerable, still a stranger in a hostile land, but she was no longer the helpless victim waiting for death. She had endured, she had followed, she had hidden, she had survived. And she had seen that even in this harsh world, there could be a flicker of fierce protection, a quiet refusal to bend to cruelty. She looked at him across the fire, his face silhouetted against the flames. "Why?" she asked softly, the single word breaking the long silence of their journey. It was the first time she had initiated speech, the first time she had dared to ask the question that weighed so heavily. He turned his head slowly, meeting her gaze. His eyes, usually so guarded, held a distant, weary look. He was silent for a long moment, considering. Then he spoke, his voice rough. "Saw too much of that kind of thing. Don't hold with it." It wasn't a grand speech, not a declaration of noble principles. Just a simple, blunt statement. He had seen cruelty, perhaps suffered it himself or seen others suffer. And he had decided, in that moment under the oak tree, that he would not let this particular instance happen on his watch. It was enough. More than enough. It was a foundation. The pursuers didn't give up easily. A few days later, they encountered them again, this time in a small, desolate valley. There were 3 of them now, grim-faced men from the town, their intent clear. Cormac saw them first, his hand going to his rifle. "Get down," he ordered, pushing Mei Lin behind a cluster of rocks. He didn't tell her to run. There was nowhere to go. He stepped out into the open, facing the riders. "You lost?" he called out, his voice even. The leader from the town, the one who had been by the scaffold, spurred his horse forward. "You know why we're here, rancher. That woman is ours. Stealing her is interfering with justice." "Justice?" Cormac echoed, a dangerous calm in his voice. "You call stringing up a woman without trial justice? I call it a hanging party." Another rider dismounted, hefting a rifle. "Doesn't matter what you call it. She's bad luck. Needs to be handled." "She's under my protection," Cormac stated, raising his own rifle, but not aiming it yet. "Ride away. Forget you saw us. There'll be no trouble." "There's already trouble," the leader sneered. "Hand her over or we take her. And you get hurt in the bargain." A standoff. The air crackled with tension. Mei Lin crouched behind the rocks, her heart pounding. She felt the fear, sharp and cold, but beneath it, something new had hardened within her. A fierce refusal to be a passive victim again. She scanned her surroundings, looking for anything that could help. She noticed a pile of loose, sharp rocks near her. The leader made a signal to the other men. They began to spread out, trying to flank Cormac. Cormac fired a single shot, not at the men, but into the ground near the leader's horse. The animal reared, startled, throwing the man off balance. It was a warning shot, precise and controlled. "Last chance," Cormac said, his voice like flint. One of the other men raised his rifle, aiming at Cormac. Without hesitation, Mei Lin scrambled from behind the rocks, grabbing 2 sharp stones. With a primal cry she didn't know she possessed, she threw them with all her might at the man's horse. The stones struck the animal's flank. It whinnied in pain and surprise, bucking wildly. The man's shot went wide, and he was thrown to the ground. It wasn't an act of combat she was trained for, but an act of pure, desperate defense, born of the will to survive and protect the man who protected her. Her intervention broke the attacker's formation, creating chaos. Cormac seized the moment. He fired 2 quick, accurate shots, disabling the other 2 men's rifles, shattering the stocks near their hands. He didn't shoot to kill, but to incapacitate and terrify. Seeing 2 of their number disarmed and the 3rd sprawled on the ground near his spooked horse, the remaining attackers lost their nerve. They were bullies, not fighters, used to preying on the helpless, not facing determined resistance. The leader, picking himself up, yelled curses but made no move to advance. "Get out," Cormac said, his voice cold, "and tell the others. She's gone. Forget her, or come looking again. And next time I won't shoot the ground." The men stumbled back to their horses, retrieving their damaged rifles. Their faces were a mixture of pain, fear, and grudging respect for the rancher who had faced them down, and for the unexpected ferocity of the woman they had come to hang. They mounted up and rode away, quickly disappearing from view. Cormac watched them go, his rifle still ready. Then he turned to Mei Lin. She stood trembling slightly, the stones still in her hands, her chest heaving. He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, the defiance in her stance, so different from the bound, terrified woman on the scaffold. He gave a slow nod, a silent acknowledgement of her unexpected courage, her transformation. "Good throw," he said, the closest thing to praise she had heard from him. She dropped the stones, her hands sore. A shaky breath escaped her lips, not of fear this time, but of release, of the sheer, raw relief of survival. She had fought back. In her own way, she had defended herself and him. They didn't return to the town's vicinity. Cormac led them deeper into the wilderness, towards his isolated ranch, a place of solitude and hard work. The journey was still arduous, but the dynamic between them had shifted. Mei Lin walked taller, no longer just following, but moving alongside him, a partner in their shared survival. The silence between them was no longer just the absence of words, but a quiet understanding, a bond forged in shared danger and unexpected defiance. She had been rescued, yes, but she had also found her own strength, resilience rising like a stubborn weed through concrete. They reached the ranch, a collection of sturdy, no-nonsense buildings nestled in a wide valley. It was isolated, peaceful. Here, far from the judgment of others, she could simply be. Cormac didn't demand gratitude, didn't make her a servant. He gave her a small, clean cabin of her own, showed her the chores, the rhythm of life on the ranch. He offered her a place, a chance. Prejudice was a shadow, a threat lurking on the edges of the world. But here, in this valley, under the vast, indifferent sky, she was no longer defined by it. She was Mei Lin, survivor, woman of quiet strength and unexpected fire. The rancher, Cormac, had not just saved her life. He had given her the space to reclaim it. Their path was uncertain, marked by the scars of the past. But facing it together, two solitary figures against the horizon, it felt less daunting. Resilience wasn't the absence of wounds, but the strength to keep standing, to keep moving forward, carrying the quiet dignity they had both found in the face of a harsh world.